Hi, I'm Iris, the knitwear designer behind hirismakes. In this video, I'm going to show you how to knit the neckline facing of the Melissa cardigan. This is a simple folded hem that gives a really nice clean finish to the V-neck of the cardigan. The first thing we're going to do is pick up stitches all the way along the V-neck opening of the cardigan. You want to start this on the marked stitch, which is the first row of the body and the last of the V-neck increases. So here I'm just picking up stitches along the diagonal edge of the left hand side of the V-neck with the right side of the cardigan facing me. Continue picking up stitches all the way along the diagonal edge of the cardigan. This should result in a really nice seamless edge. You'll soon come to the shoulder. So just before the shoulder seam there is a small straight knit piece of the cardigan. Here you want to pick up stitches along the edge as you would normally along a vertical edge. Once you've picked up these stitches, you'll end up at the shoulder seam of the garment. Here you're going to have to go round the corner. I suggest picking up one stitch in the corner between the vertical and the horizontal edges of the cardigan, and then continuing to pick up stitches all the way along the back of the cardigan. Once you've made a little bit of progress into the back of the cardigan, it's worth laying your cardigan flat to check that everything is still looking nice and that you have a nice neat edge where you picked up the stitches, especially where you've gone round the corner. Continue picking up stitches all the way along the back, around the second corner and all the way down to the bottom of the V-neck. Make sure you pick up the very last stitch of the V-neck to give a nice clean edge to the final garment. After you've picked up all these stitches, you should have something that looks a little bit like this. Don't worry, it will become nice and sharp later on. You're now going to work a row of purl stitches followed by a few rows of stockinette in order to create a facing as stated in the pattern. Make sure you end on a purl row and go all the way to the end of your stitches. You should now have live stitches and a small facing that is coming up from the picked up edge, and it should look something like this. You'll now be binding off all of the stitches from the neck facing. Use a needle size 1 or 2 sizes larger than the one you use for the neckline facing. This is to ensure that your bind off isn't too tight. For this you can use the standard bind off technique. Once you've bound off a few stitches, make sure to check that you're happy with the bind off, that it's not too tight. This is to make sure that it can go round the corners later when we sew the facing down. Once you've bound off all the stitches, cut the yarn. You should have your neckline facing looking something like this. At this point it will curl slightly because it's stockinette stitch. In the next step we're going to fold this over to create the folded hem and the kind of seamless facing from the outside. This step is quite tricky, so make sure you have good lighting and a nice flat surface to work on. Our aim is to sew the neckline facing down along the diagonal without it being visible from the front of the garment. To do this, we'll fold the neckline facing in on itself right at the edge of the picked up stitches. This can be quite tricky, so make sure you have a nice flat surface and good lighting. I also find these sewing clips pretty handy because you can clip down the facing whilst you're working on it. So you can start by clipping down the facing with the cardigan facing you. Once you've clipped the first part of the diagonal facing inwards, you can then turn the cardigan over so that you're working from the wrong side or from the inside of the cardigan. With the right side of the cardigan facing you, you'll be starting on the left side or the right side as you're wearing the cardigan. With the wrong side of the cardigan or the inside of the cardigan facing you, you can first weave in the yarn tail that was created when you picked up the neck facing stitches. Once this is out of the way, you will have no yarn tails left on this side of the facing. Make sure you're working on a flat surface, and if you have them, use your sewing clips to clip down the facing to create a nice edge as seen from the outside. You'll now need a piece of yarn that is approximately 2 to 3 times as long as the neck opening. Using a wide needle, you can start to sew the facing down. There's no exact method for doing this, just make sure you can try and identify the stitch closest to the neckline cast off stitch in order to join them together. So here I've chosen this stitch and I'm going through this purl ridge from the inside of the cardigan and then through one of the loops at the bind off of the facing. And here I'm leaving a yarn tail which I'm going to weave in later. So for the second stitch I'm going to go across and up one, go through this purl bump and then through the bound off stitch of the neck facing. Even though in theory for a diagonal you should always go across and up one, It doesn't seem to always work out like this, so just make sure you get the stitch that you think is the closest one to your neck facing, when the neck facing is laying nice and flat. Take your time with this and keep checking from the front of the garment that everything is looking nice. Make sure you don't pull this yarn too tight, because otherwise you'll create a ridge on the front of the garment. If you find that it's puckering on the front of the garment, first try and loosen the stitches on the inside to see if that will help with the puckering. If that still doesn't help, you might want to undo a few stitches and try again. Be patient with this, as it's worth it in the end. Remember to keep checking your work to make sure that everything is looking nice from the outside. Here's the same thing zoomed in a bit further to help you get an idea of how to pick the correct stitches. Continue like this until you reach the corner. So just before the corner there will be a short straight bit before the V-neck increases. So essentially you will have two corners that you need to go around, the one from the seam and the one between the straight section of the neck and the diagonal section of the neck. Identify the straight section of the neck and sew down the phasing just up until this point. Again, using sewing clips will help here to secure the facing in place. Remember that when you get to the straight part of the neck, you'll have to sew down in a different way as to on the diagonals. There's no secret recipe for going round the corner. Just make sure you stretch your facing out nicely and get the stitch that's closest to it. Around the corner you may need to skip quite a few stitches on the inside of the garment in order to get a nice flush facing. Once you've made it round the corner, you'll sew the back facing down in the way that you would sew a normal folded hem. Once you're a little bit of the way into the back facing, make sure to turn the garment back round to the right side to check that your corners are looking neat. They should look something like this. Don't worry if it's not completely perfect, as the blocking will also help even things out. Continue sewing the facing down all the way around to the end of these picked up facing stitches. Hopefully your garment looks something like this. You will still have the raw edges on the two front straight sections of the cardigan, which we'll come to in the next video. I hope you found this video helpful and that you'll enjoy making the Melissa cardigan.